Morning, everyone. I have a specific challenge now because of the amazing presentations yesterday that we had, starting from Professor Mitra and going through the whole process. I think we have a challenge because the topic that we have for us is so tangential to, I think, what we discussed yesterday. It is highly unlikely that you are going to connect with what I'm going to speak for next 20 minutes. So bear with me for next 20 minutes because it is about how do we transform inventors into innovators. And I think some of the experiences that we as an organization that we have started or our personal experiences, some of the issues, the keys that so-called R&D organizations typically miss out. In fact, I say completely miss out. When you really look at this whole transformation of inventions or inventors into innovators is what I'm going to address. So bear with me if you have a situation where you have a specific situation like this. There are people here who are very important, and I can understand that it is possible that what I'm going to speak next 20 minutes, if this is what you believe, this is what happens to you. So please bear with me because it is quite likely that we are, maybe after 20 minutes or maybe after the end of the session, we will have some sort of clarity about how do we connect together. I'm going to go back about maybe 100 years back, let us say. I hope we are okay to go early morning 100 years back. First decade of 20th century. In 1890, approximately, you know, the average size of enterprises or companies in US, I mean, it's amazing. The average number of employees in US companies was just 4. Can you believe this? There's a number of people in a company, average company in US in 1890. Okay? And within 10 years, the turn of the century, when 1901 around, you had this situation called US Steel, which became the first billion-dollar company within 10 years. Ford Motors, which started in 1903, within a decade, they started producing something called maybe 500,000 cars. I mean, you can always claim that Ford had a particular way of saying and a little bit of monopolistic scenario, but they were able to do it. My question really is, what actually happened here? How, within 10 years, things changed? Now, let us cut up or cut back, as they say in Bollywood scenarios, right? Let us come to this decade, which some people say has ended, but some people are still in that same decade, the 21st century. What have we seen in this particular decade? We have seen 9/11, which was an amazing collection of multiple thoughts, multiple people coming together to create a solution which was destructive, but it created an impact on the psyche of the whole organizations or whole countries that still lingers on, that actually created a capability. But if you really see the genesis or the capabilities that were brought together, we need to really address what really happened here. Second is we have seen the so-called globalization, the globalizing world, which has completely changed in the last 20 years. Russia demise in 1990, 91 we had the Gulf War, and then suddenly things changed so dramatically that people really don't know what is actually happening to them. And what has happened is really, if you really see the right-hand side top corner, this is where we are. This is nothing but the internet, which looks like a galaxy, the image that we have. We have Google, and Google became the encyclopedia of the world suddenly, and we really have lost touch with the so-called physical books that we used to read. Information is on our fingertips. iPod, iPhone. We are making Dreamliners, the biggest sort of systems that we never thought about. We are talking about surface computing, which Microsoft is coming up now. So what exactly is happening is really the question. We really need to see, if you really compare the first decade of the previous century and this century, what exactly has happened. And we really, maybe one characterization is something called, what I call the scale. However, before I come to that, let us see what we are seeing here. If you really can answer what you see here, the left-hand side corner of this particular image, maybe we don't know. Right-hand side also we don't know, but middle also we don't know, right? But if I may articulate, This is nothing but the internet taken in 2005. Each and every machine is a dot, and all the connections that are there are, this is what has happened. My question, second is, what is this? This is a social network of how HIV data actually spreads in a social network. Nobody really knows, but this is how it spreads. And this is a network that emerges. The third one is the food web in a lake. In a small lake, how many species eat each other? This is the food web that we have. What are we seeing here? My question really is, what is it that we have? This is amazing examples of complexity that we are creating without really knowing. We are continuously participating in creating complexity that we don't even know. And this is where my question is, who really designed these systems? Who came up with these complexities? By participating without actually knowing that this will be the output, we actually are creating all these systems. Scale is the new frontier, and I think it's important to understand scale and actually understand how do we scale up. We are a population of 1.2, maybe more billion. We have China, which is also, we know scale. I mean, that's what people believe. But how do we design scale which actually becomes sort of system which operates? We are building bigger and bigger systems. Google's custom-built server farms, if you see, with 500,000 machines, but still they use the old processors that people use, not the new ones, the new fancy processors. So what I think the point is that they are able to do amazing work with the smallest, the simplest type of machines, but connecting to them in certain architectures, certain rules, certain protocols, certain methods that work. Scale is the new frontier. Systems themselves are evolving into bigger systems, if you really see. Scale is obviously the new frontier. There was a paper by Anderson on nothing but ammonia in 1972 by Anderson, and it's called More is Different. What he says, and I sort of quote here, and it's amazing to understand this. He says, the ability to reduce everything to simple fundamental laws. I think we have a lot of lawyers here, right? Ability to reduce everything to simple fundamental laws does not imply the ability to start from these laws and reconstruct the universe. It is not about understanding the laws, what actually goes. Even if you know the laws, which seems to be the need or the so-called the quest of the scientific nirvana people had for so many centuries, that I want to know what really works. What is the causality? What causes what is not really important. Even if you know, when the scale changes, these laws are going to change. You need to discover new laws, actually speaking. And this is what I think is the important point. We are at the cusp of this scale change now, and we really need to think of how to do things differently. More is different, scale is the new frontier. I know how to make buildings. I know how to make buildings. I know how to architect a structure. But do I know how to make cities? How does Bangalore evolve in the last 20 years? Who did it? Who designed it? There might be people who would have said, okay, this is what happened. But if you really see continuously, we are contributing to the evolution of cities. Do we really know how does the city evolve? And this is where the whole realm of complex system research and complex systems really connects with us, really hits us so strongly that our methods that we have used in the past completely fail. A Weakening of Hierarchies, this was an amazing, very interesting book, but this was not on the social structure. I happen to be an ex-DRDO scientist, so I study war also as part of my hobby. This book called In Athena's Camp, which basically says information abundance permits individuals to bypass hierarchies that have deliberately or indeliberately controlled or limited information. We really need to see what is this alternative human organization forms that even if we have designed hierarchies, pyramids, or so-called org charts in our organizations, are completely being eliminated or destroyed by the inherent networks which are much more natural, much more connected. So what is this network? What exactly happened? we need to juxtaposition on how do we compete, let us say. And we see the last 100 years at least, we are getting more and more connected. So-called globalization is all about creating long-range, much more rich connections across the world that we have never seen before. Technologies are there, capabilities are there, people are there to talk to each other, to work with each other, to collaborate. In a connected age, if you remember, our competitive advantage used to be, if I own more land, if I know more agriculture, if I have more natural resources, I am more competitive. How much can I manufacture, how much can I produce became the next so-called competitive advantage. Then came how quickly I can be informed so that I can actually use that information for doing a variety of analysis or decisions. Then came how much of actionable knowledge. Knowledge is a little bit of a processing view of information. How do we process information to create so-called knowledge became the issue. Then obviously last 15 years, this word called innovation has become such a prolific use in all the speakers and most of the people who talk about it, that actually we don't know what is it, but people have started talking about how fast we innovate. And in the connected age that we are seeing, the extent of connectedness, if you see, I think this is the age of what people say co-creation. Unless we co-create, we are completely disconnected because we don't know how to scale. We actually don't know how to build cities. We actually don't know how to make internet the way it has happened. It has happened through continuous interventions, continuous impacts, continuous contribution, continuous content being delivered by all of us and maybe none of us. And this is, I think, the age where we really need to understand how to co-create. And once you get into co-creation, I think the laws, the rules become so important. Co-creation, and in my opinion, co-creation is nothing but what we call in our company also empowering ideas together. And we sincerely, seriously believe that before the enterprise die, ideas in the enterprise die. So if your enterprise is going to die or not, we can find out how many new ideas you are generating per day. If there are no new ideas, I think we are towards the elimination of the enterprise or even the nation also. How many new ideas we are implementing, how many new ideas that are coming per day. I think this is where the new world of ideas is that we need to, it's calling us actually. Edison's most important invention, of course, he came out with about 1,100 patents and also other things. I think the most important, and this is from a book called The Future of Management by Gary Hamel. He teaches at Harvard Business School, and I think the book is, of course, very, very interesting. He says, managing science through industrial research laboratory, which of course was perfected by GE, and of course GE was nothing but Edison's company. A minor invention every 10 days, a major breakthrough every 6 months is what he claimed, and in fact he did it actually. GE won more patents than anybody else in US in the first 50 years of the last century. Important point is, how do we manage science through industrial research laboratory? I think this was not happening, and this is how scale happened. This is how they were able to create scale. Of course, he had so many inventions, and he also says it is all about perspiration, not about inspiration, all the stuff. But I think the important point is to how do we create system structures, organize it so that scale happens on its own. You don't design upfront. And this is a very interesting paper or an article on Business Week which says, are you engineers, scientists, mathematicians are actually enemies of innovation? I request you to take a moment and understand what he is talking about. He says, the article says, US is great at invention, and I would like to replace US with everybody else also maybe. Organizations per se are great at invention, but not so great at innovation. We need more anthropologists and sociologists working with our engineers and scientists to develop services, products, and experiences that people need and want. And we need managers in companies to understand what they do and enable this doing. Now, how do we do that? It's a challenge. Nobody really knows because we are not been taught in our curriculums. We don't know. We have to discover how to do it. Or maybe we need to try making it. You know, this is, of course, a slightly old study, but it's a most quoted one. You need every successful product that comes to the market requires, on an average, 3,000 ideas to be generated unwritten. And we have people who said ideas are available dime a dozen. Actually, ideas are not available, in my opinion. How do we create ideas is really the task, the responsibility of each and every one of us, because if we don't help generate new ideas, I think we are not going to get into the products at all. This shows. You can see a logarithmic scale on the y-axis and see one success requires 300,000 ideas. This is the mathematics of innovation, if you may, or the so-called solutions that we are trying to execute. And what happens? We have what we call the innovation killer. And this is, I think, very, very important to understand. All of us have this thing called the psychological inertia. Main sources are one discipline only, not outside our specialty, looking for solutions where we feel comfortable. Yesterday we had one comment which is interesting, that we have categorized knowledge and the skills into so many bucketized, specialized sort of subsectors that we have become experts in that particular sector without really knowing how does it connect with other sectors or other fields. And that is why we cannot create Leonardo da Vinci's now. Because he was able to understand and connect multiple fields, So that is where invention actually happens, through continuously contributing, understanding that I actually don't know. How many of us claim that I don't know anything, actually? We start with I know. And that is where I think the problem lies. And that is the problem of great scientists, great mathematicians, and great engineers. Result of lifetime experiences, cultural backgrounds also create what is called psychological inertia. And this is the way we have always done it syndrome. We know this. And I would like to give you this small case study, which is, I think, about the 3M. Everybody talks about this, so post-it notes. Seems to be the case people sort of have been reading as the innovation case everywhere. The myth, it says, 3M has long enjoyed a reputation as an innovative company based on this post-it notes. Okay? The reality is something different. It says, far from being a shining example of 3M's far-sightedness and innovative daring, post-it brand adhesive was one of the most neglected product notions in 3M history. Why? In 1968, he came out with this particular glue, which actually was not working, for which he was not designing. And for the next 10 years, he searched within the organization, can we find an application, can we use it? His name is Spencer Silver. He became the so-called poster boy later on, but look at the struggle. It is not the organization, it's not the company, it is the person. The only reason the adhesive was still around in 10 years later was because of the persistence of its inventor. Understand, we are talking about one human being who was able to create so-called the myth that we are seeing now. 3M was trapped by the metaphor that insists that the ultimate adhesive was one that forms an unbreakable bond, whereas this was loosely connected glue, which created that post-it note, actually. So my point is, all of us, I repeat all, become idea killers after we become experts. So if and when people tell me that I am an expert, I sort of don't give him any idea, actually. I don't share any of the ideas that may be there. Because once you are an expert, you will have this problem. What is the problem? Look at the New York Times, January 16, 1880. After a few more flashes in the pan, we shall hear very little more of Thomas Alva Edison or his electric lamp. Every claim he makes has been tested and proved impracticable. Lord Kelvin, you know, we have this Lord Kelvin, the temperature unit, President of Royal Society. Heavier than air flying machines are impossible. Airplanes are interesting toys, but of no military value. This is from a military strategist. I think there is a world market. I think these guys, everybody knows. Thomas Watson, IBM chairman. He thinks there is a world market for maybe 5 computers. There is no reason anyone would want a computer in their home, in deck. 640K ought to be enough for everybody, I know. I think The next one is really a question. Who could have said this? Fooling around with alternating current is just a waste of time. Nobody will use it ever. Can anybody guess? Pardon? Actually, it is Thomas Alva Edison, the guy who created the electric bulb. He was the inventor, and he became the so-called idea killer. Whenever you see something different that you are not used to for the last 20 years, I think this is what people will come. And he has become an authority. And maybe this one, if you can actually, I think you can guess this. There is not the slightest indication that nuclear energy will ever be obtainable. It would mean that the atom would have to be shattered at will. Who said this? Pardon? Yes, 1932. The guy who gave us, and it is not in science. We don't like their sound, and guitar music is anyway on the way out. Big organizations reject anything new. Beatles were turned down in 1962 by this Decca recording company. And they became in 3 years the phenomena that we know now. My point is, since we have this psychological inertia as a natural trait, I'm not saying that this is wrong or right, but this is what we have. How do we come out of this inertia as an organization, as a nation, or as an individual? We really need to think, find methods different. We really need to think out of the box. Yesterday, Mr. Iyer talked about that the behind of the Roman horses versus the correlation with the space shuttle, the design change. I think the continuing the psychological inertia of the past also is a very apt example of the impact of psychological inertia that we have. Why don't we really talk about something different? Black Swan and Fooled by Randomness are two books that I suggest, I recommend to everybody. Nassim Nicholas Taleb says, I cannot accept a pretense of science, I much prefer a sophisticated craft. That's why we call ourselves graffiti, by the way. Focused on tricks to a failed science looking for certainties. In fact, we have a world which proclaims that we should now look at depth of certainty. I think this is an amazing and very nice articulation of the world that we have. We really need to come out of this certainty that we have been talked about. Thierry Hamel again, and he talks about the new world that we have. What is winning? What are the capabilities, the relative contribution to the value creation in the so-called new skills that we need for the new world? The first parameter is passion, 35%. Creativity, 25%. Initiative, 20%. Intellect, 15%. Diligence, 5%. Obedience, 0%. And he says, today, obedience, diligence, and expertise, mark my word what he says. Today, obedience, diligence, and expertise can be bought for next to nothing from Bangalore to Gansu. They have become global commodities. So I think it's up to us to choose whether we are going to have this diligence, obedience, and the Six Sigmas and the processes that we are embedding ourselves and creating obedience, or we really need to maximize the fires of passion that we really have. And this is a choice that we have to make if we really want to look at as a country to grow. And in 2005, this was a survey done for about almost 1 lakh of employees across the world, 16 countries, large and medium enterprises. Question was how much you are engaged with what you do. Highly engaged, only 14% said. Rest are either completely disengaged with what they're doing or partially disengaged. We really don't love our work. It's amazing. This was an eye-opener for many of the organizations. Of course, they didn't do anything, but this is what is the situation. We don't really connect with work. And then we say, okay, if you have to innovate, let us automate the processes. Let us automate the ideas, generations. Then automatically things will happen. Do you know how to make artfully is my second question. Forget about innovation, this automation. Let us look at how do we make things. And this is where this book called Artful Making from another of, I think I have this tendency to keep on recommending books, but I know lawyers don't have time to read books when people seems to be interested more in reading other type of papers. But my request is some of these books, maybe if people, other organizations can read, it will be good to know how actually invention actually happens. Artful making, he says, any activity that involves creating something entirely new requires artful making. Whenever you have no blueprint to tell you in detail what to do, you must work artfully, and that is how actually internet actually happened. Or any other serendipitous inventions people talk about. In fact, it happens through what is called knowledge work. Artful making, which includes agile software development, theater rehearsal, some business strategy creation, and much of other knowledge work, is a process for creating form out of disorganized materials. What is this form? Collaborating artists using the human brain as their principal technology and ideas as their principal material work with a very low cost of iteration. You have to keep on repeating things for innovation. They try something, then they try it again in a different way, constantly reconceiving ambiguous circumstances and variable materials into coherent and valuable outputs. And this is, I think, an amazing quote that I got. Burning your hand is a small price to pay for a good idea. We have this tendency to say that failure is a problem. We should not fail. In my opinion, I request, this is, of course, please let your employees fail. Fail big, and let them fail as quickly as possible. Because it's a small price. If you can get a big idea, a good idea, it's a small price even if you burn your hand. Because we don't let them allow, because your hands are going to burn. Why don't you touch these ideas? You are not supposed to touch this. If we don't allow them to actually think or do something. Emergence cannot be preconceived. We cannot preconceive this is the invention that I'm going to do. Emergence really needs, how does a play actually happen? An actual theater play. Reconceiving everything in the response to what team sees as newly possible with each passing moment of rehearsal as a result of each new thing tried. You need to try. Continuously try. And before you evaluate, please try. In fact, before you evaluate what I'm saying, please try what I'm saying. The only thing that interferes with my learning is my education, none other than Albert Einstein. All of us are extremely educated. Do we learn? Actions become experience, and experience becomes the material that future choices are made of. This is again artful making, and this is why it is important. Discovery suggests that there is a right choice waiting to be found. There is something already existing as so-called right. Choices are not actually existing in advance. We are making choices, we are creating those choices, and that is why artful making becomes the important method. Often business people too must make their solutions. And I think this is one of the best quotes that I've seen from this great inventor or innovator or scientist. When Einstein was asked what was most helpful to him in developing the theory of relativity, he replied, figuring out how to think about the problem was the most important. What are the assumptions? And I think I go back to again the example. The assumptions in the example that Mr. Iyer gave yesterday on the correlation between space shuttle and what are the assumptions? Has anybody actually looked at the assumptions? Every time we design, care about the premises more than the theory. We like good theories, good causality diagrams, but we never really look at the axioms on which each of these things are based. All organizations actually are designed to kill learning. Now, you may say, what are you talking about? Are you going off in the morning? I have some examples. Before that, look at how brain learns. Brain-mind learning, brain is a complex adaptive system, it's a social brain. Its meaning, search for meaning is innate in all of us. I'll just switch to the next slide to look at same article, same site, which is a good site for exploration. 3 conditions for learning. First condition is you need to have an environment which is relaxed alertness. What does it mean? Low threat and high challenge. Have you been to an organization which has low threat and high challenge? In fact, I have been to the totally reverse organizations. Whereas extreme threat and low challenges, that is where I worked for so many years. Once you have an environment where you create relaxed alertness, second condition is you need to orchestrate people, immerse them into authentic, multiple, complex experiences. This is the second condition for learning. And third condition is, once you are experienced those authentic experiences, then you get into actively processing those experiences. These three conditions make learning, complex learning happen in our mind, looks like. Whereas the organization that we have worked is, I call it chaotic dumbness, high threat, low challenge scenarios. Comply with this or else I'm going to fire you. Constant use of killer phrases. Second method, second point, we have seen something called automated disjointedness. We automate processes. How can I automate quickly? Because machines are there. But we are disjointed. We are into something called delegation, hands-off. Follow the process, don't worry about anything else, things will happen. People doesn't matter, it's the processes. The skill sets based work assignment. And this third part is really, really important for us to understand. We have seen organizations which does what I call passive analysis. Data collection, historical data analysis, and then do a lot of analysis to say, okay, these are the insights of the past history. And you know, history is not thing to do with the way, the present, or even future. History doesn't repeat, or future doesn't repeat. If you repeat history, you are bound to go out of, you are bound to die. Killer phrases, this is another book, and you know you have used, all of us have used these phrases called yes, but to kill ideas. For example, somebody tells me if I am saying about let us do innovation or whatever, you will say yes, immediately but comes and your thought comes, right? And you have actually killed any idea typically. Typically from the subordinates we keep on killing. So my request is to design organizations from chaotic dumbness to relaxed alertness, automated disjointedness to orchestrated immersion, passive analysis to active processing. This is a challenge. It's not possible maybe in the rules that we have designed last 150 years. Once you have a capability, now you need to spread those ideas in the organization. And here tipping point comes into very big picture. Malcolm Gladwell's first book, of course, I don't connect with the next three books that he has written, including the outliers also. Blink, outliers, and then the recent one is on the dog something. But tipping point, I think, is a very, very nice book which says, refers to the moment when something unusual becomes common. It talks about social epidemics. So I have to finish maybe in 5 minutes. Thanks. What I'm trying to say is that if you read this book, he says how tipping point happens. It looks at connectors, mavens, salesmen, and there are three other factors. In the interest of time, I'll sort of skip this. In fact, what we have done is we have studied the social networks, and we have also studied some of the organizations that we have been talking about, and how does they map. And we have found these are different type of organization forms that we have studied: hierarchical, ambidextrous, collaborative, learning, emergent. And we have found there seems to be correlation with the social structures or the social networks that are there inside the organizations and the so-called organization forms. So there is a possibility that if you want to develop or build a system where innovation is part of the process, it's an emergent organization or a learning organization, maybe we have some methods where you can change certain social fabric of your organization through certain rules. Once again, the rules and laws. So coming to the specific next step of once the ideas becomes important. I think patents we have discussed, we know, all of us seems to be knowing, but my point is slightly different. There are many patents granted by patent offices that can only be called absurd. There are many. Patents, all of us believe, are a serious business. Aid in diaper changing and cleaning up the aftermath by this baby actually is put inside this, locking the baby. And this is a patent granted. We have so many other patents like this. Patent is a funny business. Patenting is a funny business for inventors. Patents, of course, is a serious business for the law firms and maybe organizations. And this is the actual discussion. I'll just like to go through this discussion because this is the actual discussion that happens. Inventor says, I have this invention which I think can be patented. Can it be patented? The IP lawyer says, yes, yes, can you give me the details? He says, someone said we need to do a prior art search, etc. We will take care, don't you worry. Inventor says, okay, I will need to show that I have a patent application this year, otherwise I will not get promotion. Get me a patent. Whatever I have given you, you get me a patent. He says, you don't worry, we will get you a patent, at least the application patent. And this is where the process stops. This is the actual scenarios, actual discussions. Robust patents comes from strong inventions that require innovations. With all due respect to law firms, lawyers, they are not inventors. What I think we must protect, what you should protect, should not be dependent upon the law firm's competence in filing processes or domain expertise. We need to depend upon the strength of the invention. It is our business. And this is where the topic or the methodology of trees, some of you are aware, comes into picture, the theory of inventive problem solving. And I have a little bit of brief slides on this, which is there. But what this Russian from 60 years back did was analyze, started reading patents, and he categorized different patents, different strength of invention inherent in that particular patent, and particular levels, level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In fact, he found 77% of the patents are just a small, small increment. That doesn't really help actually. So I'll just get into how we can use. What he did was he analyzed patents, and he did through a particular method. Then he articulated in a methodology called theory of inventive problem solving, and this is what we have now. We can use these trees type of thinking to analyze any invention and say, what is the inherent strength of this particular invention, and then sort of say, if this is not strong, can I make it more strong? Not in terms of design around, not in terms of the legal parameters. It's basically how do we really take the next step on the technology or the science, if you may. And this is, I think, the power of this method, which we have been experimenting for the last 8 years in different fields. I'm a computer scientist myself, but I'm able to do it for different type of fields. So I think my point is, we need to explore something new, as I said. And just take one final minute, because the time, just 1 minute more, I'm sorry. What we know is limited by what we can know. And what we don't know today is what we'll be forced to know tomorrow. There's always limit to our knowledge. I think what we must do is create as many alternative futures as possible, also keep with us as many histories as possible, and then find out which history connects with which future. But one path is right now unfolding, and we need to find out which one. Once we can find out those paths, we work on those paths and create solutions. Of course, there are various techniques, various methods for scenario planning, then creating the so-called red oceans versus blue oceans, or creating more blue oceans, and then connecting with the business strategy and IP strategy. My point is that we need to explore different methods of thinking, which we call the lean inventive systems thinking, compared to the reductionistic approaches that we have seen for the last 200 years maybe, where we have analysis, determinism as the key method, whereas what we are talking about, let us learn, let us design, let us experiment, let us be open, and let us be natural. So final points are the complexity, as I said, is increasing, and scale is the new frontier. Deep knowledge expertise may lead to inertia and restricted viewpoint. New ways of looking at reality are needed, and our experiences and experiments says artful making, lean thinking, TRIZ, social computing, open innovation, scenario planning needs to be integrated as a framework. You cannot continue to do it in piecemeals. We need to design organizations as a learning enterprise. And we believe some of these new thinking methods or techniques has helped our clients and even us also. And we propose this to be a new framework for R&D innovation. With this, I say thank you to all, and in fact, thank the chairman for giving permission to continue. Thank you.